The F5 tornado is one of the most destructive forces that Mother Nature brandishes upon her children residing on this earth. A person's entire world can instantly vanish in the blink of an eye from the 261 to 300 plus mile per hour winds, destroying any man-made object or structure in its path, with no regard to the precious fragility of human life. Out of the thousands of tornadoes officially documented in the United States since 1950, only 59 of these terrible F5 and EF5 beasts have descended from the wicked skies that birthed them, and the odds of any tornado to join amongst their ranks is but a 1 in 1,000 chance. And 3 of these would make their residence in the upper Midwest in Wisconsin, ravaging through 3 completely different corners of the state during 3 different decades of the 20th century. This is the story of the F5 tornadoes of Wisconsin. The date was Wednesday, June 4th of 1958 in Colfax, Wisconsin. Very muggy temperatures prevailed with a calm breeze as the beginning of the summer solstice was approaching just 2 weeks away. However, the weather to the west in central Minnesota would become the prelude to the unthinkable arriving to Colfax that evening. Supercells in eastern Minnesota rampaged over the mighty Mississippi and St. Croix rivers, and not too far across the border in Wisconsin, the most powerful tornado of 1958 would come down from the heavens to bestow hell upon earth. At approximately 6:30 p.m., a funnel cloud lowers to the ground about 4 miles to the southwest of Woodville in St. Croix County. The tornado began traveling at an east-northeasterly trajectory, heading just 1 mile south of the village of Wilson. One man, Arthur Peterson, would lose his life to the tornado at this time. Approaching eastbound, the tornado would enter Dunn County and cross County Highway Q about half a mile to the south of Knapp, killing an unknown woman and a man identified as Harry Ford. Although the villages of Wilson and Knapp were spared from complete destruction, the same could not be said at all for the very small settlement of Cedar Falls, where 24 of the 25 structures in town would be completely wiped from the face of the earth. Just as it seemed this storm would maintain its nearly due east trajectory, the tornado took a glimpse to the northeast and steered its ravenous rampage in that direction, with Colfax directly in its crosshairs. The skies were growing black, and the winds began roaring as the massive tornado was heading straight for Colfax that Wednesday evening. This tornado entered the southeastern part of town, and at approximately 7:07 p.m. started destroying numerous homes and businesses. Semi-trucks were overturned, and cars were tossed hundreds of yards away from their initial location on State Highway 40. One of these vehicles, with 2 occupants, R.A. Presnell and Vernon Mindell of Bloomer, Wisconsin, were tossed 200 yards away into a field. This car was found crumpled up like a soda can, and tragically taking both of their lives. As the storm continued for another 5 miles to the northeast of Colfax, leveling numerous farmsteads along the last stretch of its death march out of town, the Colfax tornado rose back up into the skies and vanished. Colfax was in shambles. Anything this tornado was able to get its contorting hands on did so with the utmost malicious intent possible. Dozens of homes were completely swept away, with their frame and interior contents strewn hundreds of yards away, as well as brick buildings pulverized into crumbling ruination. Trees were uprooted and stripped of their bark, and about 1,000 head of livestock were killed. Numerous cars were tossed around by the tornado like child's play, left over in varying conditions, such as being overturned to crushed and mangled, and even wrapped around the steel girders of a Colfax road bridge, which had collapsed due to the magnitude of this F5 tornado. The total damage sustained by this F5 in Colfax amassed a total of $2 million, or almost $22 million adjusted for inflation and counting as of 2024. Not only was physical property left in shambles, but as were many of the Colfax residents injured and in disarray. Power outages prevented medical assistance being dispatched to 100 injured people. Police Chief Herb Zeibel, who used a squad car radio to dispatch immediate medical assistance, was the only contact to the outside world in Colfax. Within the following hours, emergency personnel and medical staff arrived from nearby communities, providing first aid care to the injured, and sending many of them to nearby hospitals in Menominee and Eau Claire, as well as the critically injured to the Twin Cities about 75 miles away. Tow trucks were also called in to clear the numerous destroyed vehicles, inhibiting traffic on Highway 40. While sources vary, between 21 to 23 people lost their lives directly from this tornado alone, making this the deadliest of the F5 tornadoes to have touched the ground in Wisconsin since 1950. As terrifying as this storm was to endure, the June 4th, 1958 Colfax F5 tornado would not be without its strange occurrences. Harry Ford, who lost his life south of Knapp, by some twisted sense of irony, had a folded insurance policy paper in his possession. This paper was cast away by the tornado and found 80 miles to the northeast in Sheldon, perfectly intact and still neatly folded. The home belonging to Ed Traxler and his family was heavily demolished, and yet his kitchen table remained in place with a paper carton of a dozen eggs still intact. A railroad signpost was also found contorted and twisted by the intense F5 winds as well. But most horrifically, one woman was found alive but injured amongst the ruin and had a half-inch diameter stick lodged in her skull. While there's no information about whether she lived or passed away from this injury, it's incredible that she was found alive at the time she was discovered by emergency personnel. Aside from the tragic and weird, as it goes with older tornadoes, the conflicting information across reputable meteorological institutions and newspaper reporting adds many layers of mystery to the Colfax F5. Thanks to the work of Jen Naramore on the website Tornado Talk, she provided tons of information on the Colfax F5 and laid out many of these differences of information into one compiled source. To start, reputable sources such as the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the Midwest Regional Climate Center, and meteorologist and renowned tornado expert Thomas Grzoulis all have conflicting reports on nearly every aspect of this tornado, from its width, distance traveled, injuries, fatalities, and even the initial rating. The width varies between 800 to 880 yards across. Some say the tornado traveled 32 miles or 33.7 miles. The number of injuries range from 74 to 110, and the fatalities from this F5 tornado are different from each of these accounts, but range between 20 to 21. Most strikingly is the difference of the rating of this tornado, as Thomas Grzoulis would rate this Colfax tornado as an F4 in his book Significant Tornadoes, which was quite a maverick decision compared to the original F5 assigned by the National Weather Service. Nonetheless, Grzoulis would ultimately recant this rating and reinstate an F5 rating to the Colfax tornado in his newer publication, F5 to F6 Tornadoes. Astoundingly, the MRCC has the tornado path going way too far north of the tornado's actual reported location. The path on the MRCC website has the tornado ripping right through Knapp, which other sources report that the tornado traveled between a half mile to a mile south of the village. This also puts the trajectory of the tornado significantly farther north of Colfax. Even with the diameter of the tornado being a staggering half-mile wide, this still would have missed town by a whopping 2.5 to 3 miles. There are also conflicting reports of what time the tornado touched down. The Eau Claire Leader newspaper, Thomas Grzoulis, and the MRCC website state that the tornado had, according to the latter mentioned news report, swept across Dunn County around 5:30 p.m. The NOAA Storm Event Database says it began at 5:52 p.m., and another source says the tornado touched down at 6:30 p.m. Considering the speed the tornado maintained was a very brisk 52 miles per hour, and conflicting sources say the tornado path measured between 32 to 33 miles in length, this means the tornado would have taken about 38 to 39 minutes to arrive to Colfax. According to a book called The 1958 Colfax Tornado: Images of America, it says in its description on Amazon that the tornado had arrived to Colfax around 7:07 p.m. If this time is correct, and the tornado took around 38 minutes to arrive, the time of touchdown would have indeed been around 6:30 p.m., suggesting that the Eau Claire Leader newspaper, as well as Thomas Grazoulis and the MRCC and NOAA websites, may have incorrectly set the touchdown time an hour prior. Another reason the 5:30 p.m. touchdown may be wrong is that an employee of the Dairyland Power Cooperative out of Baldwin, just west of Woodville, reported to a local National Weather Service facility at 6:55 p.m. that they spotted a tornado near Woodville. Interestingly, the reported sighting of this tornado had issued the very first use of the Conelrad Emergency Alert broadcast for the WEAU TV and radio station based out of Eau Claire, warning the public in the surrounding area of the imminent tornado threat. It was thought by Howard Warren, the meteorologist who issued the warning broadcast, that Eau Claire would have about 30 minutes to prepare if the tornado near Woodville were to impact the city. But instead, this tornado would be the one to develop into the lethal Colfax F5. This time frame of events would suggest that the tornado most likely touched down closer to 6:30 p.m. than anywhere close to 5:30 p.m. Unless the tornado moved very slowly early in its life cycle, telephone lines were unable to connect the power company employees' call to the National Weather Service in a timely manner, or the person very unlikely decided to wait nearly an hour and a half to report their sighting of the tornado by Woodville, then the touchdown time of approximately 6:30 p.m. makes much more sense. Now, despite the formerly mentioned MRCC's tornado path being placed considerably too far north, interestingly, there are pictures and reports of tornado damage hitting the north side of Colfax as well as the originally mentioned south and east sections of town. Tragically, the bodies of 5 men were also found in a field just north of Colfax, and whether they had been already on the north end of town or have been lofted by the tornado from a different part of Colfax is uncertain. There are some accounts that 2 tornadoes were seen, which leads to the possibility that the Colfax F5 may have either been a multi-vortex tornado with 2 separate funnels, or even 2 separate tornadoes came through. This could possibly explain why the western end of Colfax sustained little damage in comparison to the north, south, and east sides of the community. Although there is a possibility of this, the Colfax F5 is still considered to be one single tornado that laid waste to the small farming community on June 4th, 1958. However, this Colfax F5 wasn't the only tornado that wreaked havoc that evening in northwestern Wisconsin. In fact, this F5 was also part of a very deadly and powerful tornado outbreak of not 1, not 2, but potentially 3 other F4 tornadoes. The city of Chippewa Falls would end up being under the gun for the Colfax F5, which after lifting 5 miles northeast out of Colfax, returned once again as a very deadly F4 tornado. This twister would hit the northwestern corner and outskirts of the city, destroying barns, uprooting trees, and even contorting a metal radio tower into a deranged modern art piece. 3 people lost their lives from this storm, and all 3 were the members of John Butak's family. He, along with his wife and 2 children, were inside of their barn on County Highway N when the devastating winds exhaled their lethal gusts, causing the barn to collapse upon Butak and his family. Butak would be the only one to walk away from the devastated barn alive, losing his wife, son, and daughter to this catastrophe. Irvine Park in Chippewa Falls would be described as a flattened jungle by the Daily Telegram newspaper in Eau Claire, as numerous trees were uprooted and collapsed, leaving the tree canopy almost entirely wiped out. Even the Glenlock Motel would be completely leveled to the ground, but miraculously, nobody would be reported killed or injured. The other two tornadoes of horrific F3 to F4 intensity would affect the communities of Cadott, Boyd, Stanley, and Owen. Cadott would now be under the gun of the same supercell that dropped the Colfax F5 and Chippewa Falls F4. At least 1 to 2 homes were destroyed by this tornado in Cadott, and numerous people were taken to the hospital for reported injuries. Two very astounding things about the Cadott tornado is that the formerly related supercell made an apparent southeastern shift in its trajectory. This storm began almost going due east, then smelled blood in Colfax to its northeast, and finally set its sights on Cadott to the southeast before returning to the void of nothingness again. What else is that this Cadott tornado, while officially rated as an F3, could have been, according to Thomas Grzoulis, potentially an F4 tornado. As striking as this would be to rate the tornado even higher on the Fujita scale with 2 other confirmed F4s and a massive F5, this tornado and even another F2 tornado to the north in Rusk and Sawyer counties would be overshadowed by the other monsters that landed on June 4th. The last of these tornadoes would be rated as an F4 that went south of Boyd, Stanley, and Owen, which would claim 4 lives as well as injuring 3 more, destroying numerous farms in the wake of its path. This tornado, whether by the same supercell or a totally different storm, would weaken to F1 intensity and vanish in Marathon County. The Colfax F5, as well as the Chippewa Falls F4, the Cadott F3, and the final Tri-County F4 of June 4th, 1958, would cause about $83 million of damage, or an astounding $903 million and counting adjusted for inflation today. The destruction of homes, businesses, farms, vehicles, crops, power lines, livestock, and the loss of life were horrific. As for 1950, this tornado outbreak would be the deadliest seen in Wisconsin, and 29 people would lose their lives as well as 110 being injured from the horrific storms that rolled across the northwest corner of the state. Colfax, with a population of 1,100 people in 1958, would see a sharp decline of citizens who made the small town their home by the 1960 census, dropping to just 885 people, its lowest population since 1910. Donna Stolzen's recount of surviving the Colfax tornado effectively summarizes the horrific weather of June 4th, 1958. Stolzen, her husband Jewel, and their friend Erling Broughton were driving west on Highway 40 towards Colfax when the incredible darkness and winds began to approach their 1956 Oldsmobile. As they turned around to head eastbound away from the storm, they were already inside of the tornado, and their car flipped end over end as Donna had lost consciousness. The 3 people had been dispersed across different ends of the highway, their 56 Oldsmobile flung 400 yards away in a field. As Donna Stolzen awoke from unconsciousness, described seeing an eerie yellow light. The stench of sulfur was sickening. The twisted and scarred landscape looked like the edge of hell. All 3 would survive their injuries. Colfax wouldn't remain exempt from tornadoes in the upcoming years, as on June 27, 2014, an F1 would hit the small town once again and do about $1 million worth of damage to the Colfax school, destroying parts of the athletic complex as well as vent covers being blown off and opening the roof to rainwater entering the building. Despite the damage done, school superintendent William Yinkst aimed to repair the school before the start of the upcoming school year, as well as fix the athletic grounds before football season began. Thankfully, this F1 would be a far cry from the tremendous damage Colfax faced back in 1958, and fortunately, nobody would lose their life or be injured from this storm either. Though great pain had been faced by Colfax residents in the greater Eau Claire area decades prior, this pain would not be repeated once more, only to remain as a tragic addition to Wisconsin state history never to be forgotten. Wisconsin wouldn't face another F5 tornado within its boundaries for another 26 years after the Colfax F5. And while June 4th is a date that lives in infamy amongst the elderly residents of Colfax, June 8th would become unforgettable for one southern Wisconsin town just west of Madison. Stay tuned as we cover part 2 of the F5 tornadoes of Wisconsin. Thank you for watching.